Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to this DevOps.com webinar brought to you by TechStrong and Linode. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of TechStrong Learning. We have an exciting webinar ahead, but first I have just a couple of housekeeping notes to cover. First, today's session is being recorded. So if you miss any of our discussion or you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session. If you have any questions, we want you to go ahead and send those in using the Q&A tab, which can be found on the right side of your screen. The right side of the screen, that's also where you're going to find the chat tab. And that's where we want you to engage with one another, engage with us, let us know your thoughts, or maybe just where you're tuning in from. I'll point your attention to the handouts tab. We do have a report that's available for download, and that's going to be a lot of the topic of today's conversation. So feel free to download that to aid with today's webinar. And finally, before we close, we will be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So be sure to stick around. So the title of this webinar is Getting Paid: Why Cloud Providers Are Changing How Customers Use and Pay for Services. And I'm joined by Hillary Wilmoth, Senior Manager of Product Marketing at Akamai Linode Cloud, Daniel Kirsch, Principal Analyst and Managing Director of TechStrong Research, and Mitch Ashley, CTO of TechStrong Group and Principal at TechStrong Research. So Hillary, Daniel, Mitch, thank you all for being here with us. Mitch, how about you take it away from here?
Yeah, thank you very much, Cody. Appreciate you kicking things off for us. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We're very excited, Hillary, on behalf of Hillary and Dan and myself. Let's start out with just a couple of introductions. As Cody mentioned, I'm CTO with TechStrong Group, and I also work with Dan as part of TechStrong Research, our analyst firm. Dan, you want to give a brief introduction to yourself?
Yes, I'm Dan Kirsch, Principal Analyst of TechStrong Research. We focus a lot on DevOps, cloud, cloud native development, along with public cloud in general. And we actually wrote a hybrid cloud for dummies and cloud for dummies. So we're really focused on cloud and the evolving world of cloud.
Which is perfect for our topic. Hillary, introduce yourself if you would.
Sure. I'm Hillary Wilmoth. I'm the Senior Manager of Product Marketing for Akamai Linode Compute. I have been running the go-to-market and developer community understanding and relations for the last few years for Linode, and I'm now happy to talk about the changing ecosystem and the alternative cloud and now alternative payments as a recent release from the business.
Very good. Very good. And thank you for mentioning that too, because that is the kind of focus of our topic today. It's actually based on some research that Linode commissioned TechStrong Research to do. And Dan has been heading up this most recent project. Dan, do you want to say a little bit about kind of what the focus of the research is, why we embarked on what we're looking at? Give us a little bit of background.
Yeah, so this has been a fun project. We've been tracking public cloud and alternative cloud quarterly. So we did a report in 2021. We did one in Q1 of 2022, and this is the Q2 report. And so what we want to do is we want to track trends, track pain points, why people are considering alternative cloud, what they might not like about their current cloud providers, whether multi-cloud is just jargon or something real, and we're trying to see how it's evolving over time. Because the cloud has all of a sudden the cloud has been around for more than a decade. At the same time, there's still a lot of changes in the market. So it's in many ways it's a very well-established technology. At the same point, it is rapidly evolving and changing with new vendors and huge. There's obviously a couple 800-pound gorillas in the market, but the world is more than just the big hypervisors. And so this most recent research involved nearly 500 respondents around the world, all sorts of different sizes of organizations, from really small companies to big enterprises with more than 50,000 employees. And industry-wise, it was across more than 20 industries, heavily a lot of folks in the tech sector, also in financial services, but we saw people in everything from transportation to education. So why don't I jump into a little bit of the data? And what I was alluding to was, we got these huge hyperscalers that everyone's heard of, even non-technologists know that Amazon does more than sells books. So we want to know what cloud platforms respondents are using. So as you can see, the big three hyperscalers have huge adoption rates. 45% for GCP, almost 55 for Microsoft, and 70 for AWS. But then what we wanted to do is we wanted to look at alternative cloud providers as combined as a market player in cloud, and understand how big is this? There's a bunch of I don't want to say small, but really pure play cloud providers in this alternative cloud segment. And I was pretty impressed. I don't want to say I'm surprised, because we've been doing, this is the third report we're doing, but almost a third of participants are doing some work with the alternative cloud. And then drilling in a little bit more, multi-cloud is always sort of a hot issue, because you have some people are saying, multi-cloud is just sort of services driven. There's no reason you need to be on one cloud. But 65% of participants are using more than one cloud provider, and almost 20% are using one of those big three hyperscalers and an alternative cloud provider. So that's something I find really interesting, because there's a lot of chatter in the market about do you go one cloud, do you go multi-cloud, and Mitch, what are you thinking? What are you hearing when you're talking to teams?
Well, it's obviously the hyperscalers kind of dominate a lot of the press coverage, and you have heavy marketing budgets, and of course they're all important players in this ecosystem: AWS, Azure, Google, etc. I think what's interesting in the evolution of the market is those services have gotten bigger, more complex, a lot of capabilities that are there. It also increases the complexity of that environment, and that's good for some things, and there are times when maybe that complexity doesn't serve the customer as well. And it's one of the tenets, I think, of the alternative cloud providers, of which Linode, now part of Akamai, fits into. I kind of the path of least resistance cloud, right? It's not hard to get going. You can literally kick things off in a matter of minutes. I was sharing with Hillary that my first exposure to Linode was back when I was CIO at an organization, and one of the developers showed up at my desk. Hey, I've got that prototype set up and running, and I was like, really? That was fast. I mean, I know we're running in a hyperscaler, and his response was, no, I'm running in this thing called Linode in a different platform, and I just set it up, and we can run it in production there too. But I got it all working, and here, let's take a look at it. It's like, fantastic, great. I mean, it just was a really good, for me, personal experience that validates a lot. And I think your analysis too, and what we've seen from prior reports is when you look at collectively the alternative cloud providers, it's a significant part of the market. It's not a fringe or edge, quote unquote, part of the cloud market. It's a very substantial group of players in this area.
Yeah, I think that simplicity is an important part, because the big hyperscalers have it's amazing what they can do. I mean, they're deep into AI. They're doing stuff with quantum computing. You can get qubits on demand for quantum. The vast majority of users don't need that. It's interesting. It's really cool, but most people don't need that. And but also developers who are certified and really know how to use the big hyperscaler platforms command huge salaries also. And so there's a talent shortage, and I think the alternative cloud providers also play an important role in giving companies what the cloud was all about, giving end users what the cloud was all about, which is getting raw compute, networking, storage without 8,000 APIs and they've got APIs. It's it's easier to get to a point where you're actually coding and building applications rather than setting up the environment and having to get everything to work before you can, planning the plumbing before you can even get value out of the platform.
Music to your ears, I'm assuming, Hillary.
Oh yeah, I'm just nodding along this whole time. I think that from your story, that's a very common way that we hear feedback from our customers is either, oh, I didn't even know I was using it, or someone else in the organization was using it, because Linode has been a proving ground for developers for going on 19 years now, to be able to test and understand and validate in a fully featured platform that is just as scalable or production ready as one of the hyperscalers, but without some of the maybe challenges or drawbacks or deployment kind of requirements that would slow you down before you can innovate.
Yeah, then even with the multi-cloud, I think it's interesting because my personal view is multi-cloud is here to stay. It's here forever.
Yeah, it's already here, right? It isn't coming, it's here.
Yeah, and it drives you a little nuts. It's a hot topic in the analyst world. Do you do a primary cloud or one cloud or multi-cloud? And for any company of any size, through acquisitions or through partners or through different divisions doing different things, you're multi-cloud whether you planned it or not. So you sort of have to have a multi-cloud plan. Otherwise, you're going to be multi-cloud and it's going to be a mess. So I'm a firm believer that multi-cloud is here. Now, whether you're going to, I think we're a far way off from just moving workloads left and right all over the place. But having, I think most companies in the data bears it out, have more than one cloud vendor. For
sure. I do want to also, just as an aside, remind folks that we have the report available that we're referencing some of the data from what Dan's been showing. If you look at the handout section in the upper right-hand corner of our webinar interface, it says handouts, chat, QA, polls, handouts. You can download right there. We're also will email this to everyone who registered for the session today. So all the data is in there. You can kind of absorb it at your leisure and your heart's desire. So also just a reminder, jump in on chat if you want to make a comment about what we're talking about. Hey, I agree with that. Hey, I don't know if I see that the same way or have this experience. Happy to engage and let you help us shape the conversation today. And you can submit questions in chat or in the Q&A, and we're happy to weave those into our conversation too. So Dan, let's jump into a little bit more of the data that you
just
from the report.
Following up what Mitch said. So we're just sharing a small subset of the data. So check out the report and you'll see a lot more information. So following up on multi-cloud and the movement in the market, we want to know how many respondents are considering adding another cloud vendor. So what we found is 40% are considering adding another cloud vendor. And of course, why is an important follow-up question, of course. So we asked those who are considering adding another vendor, why are you doing that? And so a little more than half said they want to be less reliant on one or two cloud vendors. 38% said costs are too expensive or too complex. And I think that's an important aspect because it's not just the cost, it's very expensive. It's reading those bills from hyperscalers can be very, very complicated. So each one charges differently depending on data movement and where you store data and all sorts of other factors. There's a cottage industry of companies that are purely focused on reading AWS bills. So it's certainly expensive, but complex is another important element of that. And then 31% are spooked by outages and thinking about adding another cloud vendor because of that. And then we wanted to also, this is something that we've sort of been curious about and passionate about, and we've been asking the question about, are you concerned about competitive pressure from your vendors? So if we go back to that question on why are you considering adding another cloud vendor, nearly a quarter said that that they feel that their cloud vendor is either a competitor or becoming a competitor, and that's the reason they're searching out another cloud vendor. So that's pretty high. I mean, a quarter of those who are considering adding another cloud vendor are doing it because of competitiveness reasons. And then we ask this question: are you afraid your cloud provider will become a competitor? And I was surprised, and this answer has been consistent quarter over quarter, that about a quarter say yes, we're afraid that they're going to be a competitor. About a quarter say our cloud provider is already a competitor, and a little bit more than 50% said no. So that's a huge number are looking at their cloud provider as a potential competitor. And I think it's a complex question because there's a few different things to think about. So of course, Amazon is a huge, complex enterprise. You know, they're doing everything from selling vacation packages to furniture. They're approved in 50 states to be a pharmacy. You know, whether there's talk of them getting into banking. So of course there's fear that Amazon or one of the other big cloud providers will come into your industry. And then there's also another element to think about. If you're a technology company or a partner of these vendors and you're building an offering in their partner ecosystem, you know, let's say you're building a security offering to help AWS customers, and you are an AWS partner and you're available in their ecosystem. As AWS adds more and more features and widens sort of their offerings, they might natively start offering exactly what your business is focused on, and all of a sudden customers are going to say, I can just use what Amazon has, I don't need you. So I think this competitive nature comes from a few different angles, and I think that's why we see such a huge number.
I haven't had it happen to myself, but I have seen it happen to some colleagues of mine. I know some folks went into the directory in the cloud kind of business, and poof, all of a sudden their hosting provider, hyperscaler, if you will, offered something similar. So, I mean, it's just one example. I think a lot of this says it's on the minds of a lot of people, which I think is something that really stood out to us. It wasn't a sort of on the edge, fringe kind of condition again. It's pretty mainstream concern. So that might also warrant some of the multi-cloud too. That way, Dan, you're not entirely embedded or invested in one platform. And if you need to pivot, you have some options as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of companies that I talk to are struggling. You know, they've gone down the path of multi-cloud, but they're struggling to figure out, you know, how deep do we want to go within a cloud environment? You know, as you rely more and more on the services and that a cloud provider offers, it's obviously harder to get off of that platform, and so they become stickier and stickier. You're using more capabilities that those platforms offer. And so it's sort of I find a lot of companies aren't sure how to approach it. You know, do we go all open source and just use cloud for the infrastructure to give us flexibility, or do we go in on the cloud on this cloud provider's approach, use their tools, but understand the idea that we're pretty locked in here, and it's going to be expensive and painful to go onto another cloud platform. At the same time, you're getting great results because they have good technology, and you're taking full advantage of the technology. So I think it's sort of a decision that a lot of companies need to think about. I think sometimes it evolves down a path. Hopefully, you're planning your cloud strategy, but sometimes these things sort of unfold in a bit of an unplanned way, and then all of a sudden you've either gone down one path or the other without thinking about it.
I want to get to the payments discussion, but I don't want to miss the opportunity of just asking you, Hillary, is the competitive threat from your cloud providers, is that something you have heard in the past or hear that coming up with customers? Does that surprise you at all?
I think that market has seen so much consolidation. And as you look at the products and services that are being built by each of these hyperscalers, it's kind of impossible not to see these tie-ins. But at the same time, as you're looking as they diversify their businesses, and as Dan was saying, like You don't necessarily need someone who's doing banking and selling books and fulfilling your groceries. And is that coming at the cost of your cloud? Or how is that impacting your overall relationship or use with that hyperscaler over time? Because as they continue to grow, their pursuits may be less oriented to cloud and more towards other things. So as you as a customer, it might be slightly concerning. So yeah, I mean, is my long story short. But I think we also see that that's been part of the impetus for customers who are maybe not necessarily creating an intentional multi-cloud, but they've kind of wound up in it. And as you said, Dan, it's the realization of, should I go further down this path, or can I evaluate, or are there solutions available through alternative providers or alternative solutions or open source or other tooling that can satisfy my workload and support it at the scale that I need moving forward. Oh, and by the way, there's some nice added benefits of doing that in terms of ease of use, scalability, pricing, et cetera, that you support as well, that you're no longer experiencing from those hyperscalers as they continue to diversify.
Very good. Well, let's thank you, Hillary, for your perspective on that. You have two analysts on here with you, so you're doing a great job of holding your own.
Thank you.
So, you probably know what you're getting into. So anyway, so let's turn our attention to talking about payments, Dan. That was one of the things that we focused on in this area of the research. You can't turn on CNBC, CNN, Fox Business Channel, Wall Street Journal without talking about crypto this and this, some kind of currency that certainly is a topic for everyone. And I think we were interested to see how relevant that is to the space of cloud providers.
Yes, this is an area, the cloud has always been known as being fairly flexible in terms of payments. It was sort of revolutionary when the cloud was first coming into its own, that you could just use a corporate credit card to pay for cloud services. I mean, there's plenty of stories of CFOs saying, why are we paying Amazon all this money? What is this? And I think the market has evolved since then. But the idea that you can quickly swipe your card and pay for really enterprise level computing was revolutionary, and it's still pretty powerful. So what we wanted to ask is, in terms of paying for cloud, how are you currently paying for cloud, and how do you want to pay for cloud? So about 50% of people, 52% are using credit cards, and what's interesting is 48% say they want to, which is when I progress into the next areas, you'll see, that's a small disconnect of only 4%. But if we jump over to alternative payments, such as UPIs, PayPal, Venmo, and some others, 25% of respondents are using those alternative payments, but 11% more, 36% want to be using that. So it's a big jump in the other direction, a lot of demand in terms of wanting to use alternative payments. And then in crypto, I was frankly very surprised that 9% are saying that they're now using some form of cryptocurrencies, and 16% want to. But let's focus a little bit on alternative payments and talk about that. It's interesting. I was talking a couple of weeks ago to a CIO of a company that has folks overseas in India, and they really want to use, for instance, UPIs, which is a payment system that's built into the Indian banking system. It's meant as an alternative to credit cards, but you don't have to pay the 3% tax that you have to when you use a credit card, and vendors don't have to pay that out to credit cards. Also, she was saying, people are just used to using alternative payments there, and that's just standard. They don't want to use credit cards. They don't have credit cards. They're not issued to widely in companies, and it's just not done. And people want to use the same type of payment that they use for other things. So you might go for a business lunch, use an alternative payment, business travel, alternative payments, and these alternative payments are getting more and more built into the way that people interact with other businesses and the way they pay for business services, not just personal expenses, but also business services. So I was pretty surprised, the current use of alternative payments, and then how many people really want to use that and are sort of waiting for vendors to say, yeah, gee, we're ready and able to accept these sort of payments. Mitch, any thoughts on the data? And you're on mute. It's the word of 2020, 2021, and 2022.
On my mug. You're on mute. I forgot that. Yeah, it was interesting. The cryptocurrency, I wouldn't have guessed that. I mean, that says to me, we have a sizable sampling here, so it's pretty relevant data. And it says to me that's part of the financial management of what organizations do. You could argue whether that's true of small or medium or large and what the differences might be. And I think you'll have some insights on that coming up. PayPal, no surprises there. As large organizations, we tend to think of everything as, goes through accounts payable and they write checks or transfer things to banks. But I think that's no longer true. Yes, they do that, but they also do all of these other forms of payments too, or a good mix of those. So I'm really curious to look at the size of the organizations. And, is this just small businesses that you like to use PayPal and maybe they want to do some crypto, or are we talking about the big players too?
Yeah, and some of what I think is the cloud. The cloud is very pivotal for a lot of companies who are totally built on the cloud. So it's not this renegade fringe thing, but there always has been sort of a perception that you can do some shadow IT on the cloud. So I think this alternative payments and crypto is also goes back to the roots of the cloud of that developer can grab some alternative cloud using an easy form of payment and not going through procurement. So as Mitch was saying, what we wanted to know is who's really using these alternative payments. Is it just really small companies or those a consultant doing it on their own? And what we found was actually really interesting, and it surprised me. So what's not surprising is the smaller organizations under about 1,000 employees. They're using alternative payments and they want to use alternative payments. So you can see in this graph, the red is how do you want to pay, and the blue is how are you paying. And you'll see that those companies under 1,000, they really want to use alternative payments. And the vast majority of pretty large companies are fine with RFPs and credit cards and sort of paying for cloud services the standard way that you pay for other business expenses. Then what we saw is this spike as you get to really big organizations with more than 50,000 employees. There's this big disconnect all of a sudden where 22% are using alternative payments, but 38% say they want to use alternative payments. And this surprised me because you would think these big organizations, they've got legal departments, they have procurement departments, they have people to negotiate big enterprise cloud deals, but they're interested in alternative payments. So my hypothesis, after talking to several people about this, is that once you get into these really large companies, it's almost they're broken up into divisions and subdivisions. So it's almost like there's groups within these large enterprises that act as small businesses, and they might not want to go through central procurement. I mean, there's a good chance that, frankly, most businesses with more than 50,000 employees are using one, if not more, of the major hyperscalers, along with lots of on-prem infrastructure as well. But they might not want to put an experimental thing or a project on the enterprise cloud of choice. They might want to just quickly grab compute and use an alternative payment. And I think that actually speaks nicely to your experience, Mitch, that you brought up with Linode, where you guys had a deal with a cloud provider, and that developer said, "I'm just going to do it myself."
Yeah, and actually, that individual was using it in their personal life. It used it in school, used it for their own work, et cetera. So it was kind of carry over into the work environment. I wonder, the other thing, and we don't have data that indicates this one way or another. I wonder also in larger organizations, you tend to have people who manage funds, right? Manage their 401k portfolios, manage their own currencies that they're doing internationally. And, you know, what do we pay with this? What based on currency rates or investments, things like that. Maybe crypto and those kind of things are another just investment. Now, probably not right now, given how much crypto's dropped in the market recently, but at some point in time, it's like, great, let's pay it with crypto because, you know, the value has really gone up. We get a lot more, you know, bang for our crypto, if you will. And they just use it as they would any other, you know, fungible kind of financial instrument.
Yeah. So, we dove into looking at alternative payments by company size, and you know, another area we wanted to look at is, you know, how do different age groups, you know, look at alternative payments? How do they approach it? So I didn't want to ask people, you know, how old are you? That's not something I typically ask in a survey. So we asked people to self-identify. Are you a Gen Z, millennial, Gen X, or a baby boomer? And not surprisingly, the youngest Gen Zs, over 50%, say they want to use alternative payments. What I think is interesting is, so if you look at this chart, you say, oh, boomers aren't so interested in alternative payments. Almost a quarter of them say they want to use alternative payments. So we're not just, you know, this isn't something that just, oh, you know, the young folks in our company, they're just interested in alternative payments. It's really across the board. I mean, obviously, it skews towards the younger set, but a quarter of boomers are saying, I want to use alternative payments too. So I thought that was interesting. Obviously, there's a age disconnect, but there's also an agreement that people are open to alternative payments, and it's not something where they're saying, you know, that's not for me, and we have zero interest in it. So then, you know, clearly there's interest in alternative payments. People want to use alternative payments. I think the data makes it pretty clear that there's a demand for alternative payments across businesses of all sizes, across ages. So who's accepting alternative payments is obviously the next question. So what we did is we wanted to look at the big three hyperscalers and then the seven vendors that we consider alternative cloud providers. And what we found is that alternative clouds and alternative payments really go hand in hand. So those folks who are using alternative cloud providers are twice as likely as those just using hyperscalers to say they want to use an alternative payment, which I thought is pretty interesting. Part of that could be driven by the fact that none of the AWS, Azure, and GCP don't support alternative payments. And you'll see in this little chart, and this chart's in the report. So if you're trying to take a screenshot or something, just download the report and you can see it. And of course, it's subject to change, and depending on where you live, the payments differ. But of the big three hyperscalers, only Google Cloud supports PayPal, and that's only as a backup in case your primary payment doesn't work. You can put that in as a backup so that your cloud instances don't go down. However, what you can see with these alternative cloud providers is you've got all sorts of choice. Some are allowing Google Pay, you've got PayPal, and Apple Pay supported. So there's a lot of flexibility with these alternative cloud providers in terms of what types of payments they're willing to accept.
Certainly, kind of across the board, or at least for most, you know, PayPal, the things that have been around for a while are much more accepted. Crypto being something that looks like it's eking into the market. And by the way, I almost wanted to forewarn everybody we're not going to do any millennial bashing on our webinar today, and you lived to that of not picking on any of those age groups. So that seems that happens on every time that comes up. But I thought it was particularly interesting. All of the providers are giving at least some, more than one way of paying, because I think folks manage their funds, their cash, their payment methods, based on their needs, not on their suppliers' needs. So customers demand that kind of flexibility.
Yeah, and I think that segues nicely into what Hillary wants to present is so on that chart, Linode was featured as one of those alternative cloud providers, and I know Linode is hearing it from your customers that they want alternative
yes, we
alternative
are
payments. So, which is always nice because it says our data is accurate because you guys are seeing the same thing. So you want to share a little bit about what Linode is doing?
Sure. I think that for the last 19 years, as I said, Linode has been in the game for cloud and trying to really understand the developer community and what they need when it comes to their cloud provider, and have been able to make I won't say maybe adjustments along the way to keep it as developer friendly and focused as we can. And that means alternatives in this case is in this modern market of not just alternatives to your cloud provider, but alternatives to your payment methods, to your sign-in methods, and just trying to find ways for customers to make it as easy as possible, which is really simple and true to our mission to accelerate innovation by making cloud computing simple, affordable, and accessible to all developers. The change that you're really seeing from the developer community is kind of being driven, as you said, from that personal preference into your now kind of maybe more work environment or a test environment, and have seen the preference of 80 to 90% of this desire for just the core primitives, which is when you start considering an alternative cloud versus a hyperscaler, is that, do you have the tools you need? What do you need beyond that? And as long as I have my core compute, storage, containerization, databases, et cetera, or the ability to choose between deployment via a platform, an API, or a CLI, what are your true decision points or checklist as you go through and say, can it support my workload? And that's where the alternative cloud really comes into play and can support modern cloud applications at the scale that's necessary as you continue to grow your business or your project to the stage that you need. Like I said before, it's the innovation proving ground to validate and continue moving forward. But at the end of the day, when you turn it back to alternative cloud and alternative payments, it really is just about keeping it simple, that you're giving the people the choice, that you're allowing them to go back to the UPI example. You're talking about something global now, that as Linode gets bigger or as alternative cloud gets bigger, we have to consider who actually wants to use the platform or the service or the product, and what barriers might stand in their way. UPI, for example, is a perfect one because that's the primary system of payment in India. And if we can't support that or provide an alternative through something like Google Pay or PayPal or something that natively integrates with their banking system, then you are cutting out or making it more challenging for developers to use these types of services. And over the last few years, Linode has been really focused on how do we kind of take away some of those barriers, or now Linode Akamai has been focused on taking away these barriers for developers and saying, how do we make it simpler? How do we make it so you have less ways to, or less user IDs and passwords to remember? Well, if you're using Linode, you probably have Google, you probably have a GitHub. Can you SSO in? And that's something that we published or released a few years ago. And that's been kind of the initial driving factor was, okay, how do we make it easier to get into the platform? And then we're able to move on to have conversations with developers who are like, this is great, but what I would really like, or would make it really easy in terms of signing up for Linode or becoming a Linode user or an alternative cloud user, let's be honest, I need an alternative payment method. I am so tied to my use of Google Pay, Apple Pay, PayPal, UPI, whatever the local flavor of payment method is, that's how I want to be able to log into my cloud or create my cloud account. So we have been prioritizing these efforts within our business and have been truly trying to pull as much customer feedback as we can, or community feedback, and say, what do we need? So this is an example from a customer who said, I'm trying to create an account, but it's asking for a credit card. Their preferred alternative would be PayPal. And that's, pretty common, is that if you look across the cloud providers that, hyperscalers or not, credit card is part of the standard process. And you've seen the alt cloud move away and try to add to ways to support payments through other options. Again, someone preferring PayPal because credit cards are challenging. And it's not just globalization. Some of it can be some of the just personal preference, but it really all comes down to ease of use. As you can see here, this is just a quick example from our Cloud Manager interface to show that our next step, based on all that feedback from our customers, was, okay, great, thank you, we appreciate that, and we're going to do something about it. So now we've put PayPal and Google Pay within our interface so that now you can pay recurring payments with these methods, and hopefully make it easier for you so that even if you had to sign in with a credit card, now we're not requiring you to continue with that credit card. But we realized that that was still a little short of what would truly enable developers worldwide to accept alternative payments, alternative providers as well as part of their workflow. In this case, this release is actually coming out starting next week. Akamai Linode customers will now be able to sign up for Linode using your alt payment of choice through GPay or PayPal. And that's really exciting for us. So this is just some quick views of the process, which might be a little bit hard to see, but you can clearly see those new payments in there, and are just really happy and excited about the opportunity to engage with more developers, offer a choice in cloud that may not have been as accessible before, and just continue to follow through on the idea that cloud is for everyone. Alternative clouds are just as powerful in terms of products, primitive solutions, and now ease of use and choice as you continue to develop your infrastructure. One of the things that we are happy to offer attendees of this webinar is $100 free credit to get started on Linode, just to get you into that interface, use your alternative payment of choice starting next week, and move from there. We do have some product releases as well to if you want to test out things like our managed Kubernetes, managed database, our NVMe block storage, anything in there, this credit is good for. So it's just a general platform use, and we hope you can test us out and find a project that makes sense to use Linode as your proving ground.
Good. So I'd love to think that, clearly you do this because you've seen research from TechStrong Research, and that fully informed all the things that you're doing. I say sarcastically. Maybe at least
it's not sarcastically. I mean, we as much as we say customer validation, and that is incredibly important to us as we innovate or build our own businesses and solutions. We do and appreciate the research and understanding of where the market is. When we started approaching alternative payments in general, we did a ton of research to say which are the most popular, which ones are globalized, which would help advance this market versus this one, who have been asking for this, and then turning that into some prioritization to move forward. Ultimately, Google Pay and PayPal are the most used globally. So how can we help as many developers as quickly as possible gain access to an alternative cloud? But this is how we move forward. And I think we're pretty excited about that opportunity for the innovation and creation of projects that can come out of it, but also to help people evaluate and see the difference between a hyperscaler and an alternative cloud. Because I think it's pretty stark. And sometimes people just need to see it for themselves, that I can go into this interface, I can deploy all the same things that I could deploy in AWS or Google, and I can build on top of it with the integrations or toolings or things that I would expect. So seeing is believing, and we hope people try it out.
Well, it's great that you're already there in doing alternative payment forms, which is sounds like making customers happy based on the data that we saw. One of the questions I wanted to get to from our audience, Dan, is anything in the data or in our discussions with companies, customers, et cetera, that says we would expect to see things like crypto and alternative payments to continue to increase in terms of organizations wanting to use that as a payment form?
Yeah, so we're definitely tracking. How are you? We've tracked from quarter to quarter. How are you paying for cloud services? Haven't seen a huge change in that number, because we looked at Q1 2022, Q2 2022, and didn't see a massive change. And frankly, if there was a huge difference, I would be surprised. But I certainly expect it to continue. I mean, I expect that we're sort of at a tipping point where we're sort of peak credit card, where it seems like those wanting credit cards and those using credit cards, there's a little disconnect on the low end. So maybe fewer people will be using credit cards, but that disconnect between wanting to use alt payments and wanting to use crypto is significant, and I don't see any reason why it would slow down. Crypto is sort of its own thing. There's a lot of it, and it's not just one cryptocurrency. We all hear about Bitcoin, but there's many different currencies. Some are trying to be more stable than others through various algorithms. But I'm not tracking crypto super closely on this. But alternative payments, I think there's no reason to think it's going to decrease. And I love the quotes that you had, Hillary, in terms of customers who clearly like Linode, because they're sort of warning you, like, hey, you might be missing out on customers because I like alternative payments. I'm willing to use my credit card, but I'm being nice, and there might be people not so nice. I think those are great quotes. And you mentioned a few times sort of a worldwide audience, and I think that's just such an important aspect of it. The world of cloud is worldwide. I mean, our participants in this survey, we had a large number from India and from Asia and of course from North America and Europe, but there's a huge contingency of very important development organizations. So there's big companies within Asia, but then there are huge U.S. enterprises who use contractors or who have huge DevOps and developer organizations overseas, and that's a critical component to the way IT organizations run.
Right, and I think that I wanted to maybe jump back a little bit as well and kind of comment on the virtual wallet. That is ultimately what we're talking about here. As people move away from credit cards or using them more sparingly, at the same time, they may be pointing that behind something else. They may still have a credit card behind Google Pay, but the management of the virtual wallet is just so about the ease of use, and it's being adopted pretty quickly. And from our customer perspective, or the feedback that we collect through our customer beta programs, or just generally through the platform use, we do see things like they would like to pay with crypto. So yeah, we've been tracking that. It's not something that we're ready to make a decision on, but at the same point, it's nice to know where customers are moving that virtual wallet to understand not just beyond Google Pay and PayPal or Apple Pay or some of the standards you might expect that's in the majority of people's virtual wallet. What's the next option beyond, or for crypto and beyond?
Yeah, and I think that's an important aspect, because there are alternative payments. Doesn't mean there's no credit card. You could have an underlying credit card under the alternative payment, but it really helps businesses of all sizes. Everyone's had their credit card it either needs to be renewed and they send you a new one, or it's somehow been compromised and you get a new one. And especially for the SMB market, you've then got to go to GoDaddy and your cloud platform and 17 other services that all have your credit card to update your credit card. If you're using an alt payment, you just put the credit card in the alternative payment. You still authenticate in the same way. You still pay the same way. So you've swapped out what's in your virtual wallet, but the virtual wallet is unchanged. So it helps a lot with the management of payment.
Very good. I think we've covered questions from the audience. Let's do this. And I just want to remind folks, you can download the report. It's free. It's in the handout section of this webinar. We'll also send a link or an email with the report that you can download it later as well. So that's something everybody has access to and can utilize. How about this? Let's just do a kind of a wrap-up, parting thoughts on either alternative payments or kind of anything else I've experienced through the research that we've done, or that's might be relevant to our conversation today. Hillary, do you want to jump in with a parting thought?
I think I've said so much, but at this point, I think my takeaway remains that the alternative cloud is an extension of customer preferences and things that they want to choose between, and how that translates into ease of use, support, payments, deployment methods, and just ultimately how someone wants to build on the cloud. So it's not just alternative cloud, it's the alternative choice for customers, period, and giving them the flexibility and opportunity to essentially do what they want or need to move forward with their projects. And we're committed to continuing to support developers in that way, and we'll be tracking this as we look for the next step in our roadmap, and hopefully continues to solicit this great research and support as we move forward.
Great. I did want to ask too, just to reconfirm, how do folks take advantage of the $100 credit? Maybe that's an alternative form of payment too.
I believe that's the link that you put in the chat there. It should just bring you to a landing page that you can just sign up directly, and your $100 credit will be applied. If you want to use the alternative payment method of GPay or PayPal, you would have to wait till next week as we continue to or officially launch next week. But if not, then you can get started with Linode right now.
You can use that link, and you can sign up with Google. You can use GitHub. You can use your email address. Lots of options that are available to you. So very good. Dan, final comments.
Yeah, final comments or thoughts, and I want to plug this research in terms of stay tuned, because I think what's important to track also is that segment of respondents who say that they're considering adding another cloud vendor, to sort of see what are the drivers of that and how those change over time. Because I imagine those can change pretty significantly based on things that happen in the news. So for instance, about a third of those saying they're considering another cloud vendor said it's because of recent outages. Is there going to be news in Q3 or events that cause that to spike or to go down? And then also to sort of track that that competitive nature. So is your cloud provider a competitor or not, or do you fear that they're a competitor, and see how that changes over time?
Very good. I think you both have said it well. I'm just going to do a wrap up here. A reminder, folks, you'll get an email with a link to the recording and, of course, the report to download. We really appreciate your time that you've spent with us today. Hillary, we want to thank you and the Linode team for sponsoring the webinar today, putting this together and bringing this information to folks and sharing that with them. Great organization that I've known for a while. Oh, there's a quick question somebody put in. I noticed that the credit only lasts 90 days. Is that correct? They've got 90 days to use it. Is that how it works?
Once you sign up for your account, the $100 will be in your account and be used based on the resources that you deploy and use. But If you don't use it, will expire after 90 days once you create your account.
Just use it or lose it. So jump in and use it. Hey, once you get involved, I imagine that credit will really help you get started. So thanks for asking your question. Again, thanks to the Linode team. And we enjoy working with you as part of putting this together. Dan, fantastic work on the research and some really great insights and sharing that with us from the TechStrong Research team. And of course, I want to thank the TechStrong group, Cody, and all the folks on the team that bring these together. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Cody, and let you wrap things up.
Thank you, Mitch. And I'd also like to thank Hillary and Dan for taking time out of their busy schedules to be with us today to go over this research. So Mitch already did remind everyone that this session was recorded. So you should be receiving an email with a link to access that recording. You can also find it on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and be sure to look in the on-demand section. So we do still have 4 $25 Amazon gift cards to give away. Our first winner is Christoph D. Our second winner is Nikki B. Our third winner is Sohail G. And our fourth and final winner is Michael C. So to the 4 of you, congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card. But if you don't happen to see that email, please check your spam folder. So we really appreciate everyone spending time with us today. We ask for 1 extra moment of your time to fill out a brief post-webinar survey that should pop up on your screen here in just a moment. But otherwise, we do hope to see you at an upcoming TechStrong Learning webinar or workshop. Everyone, have a great rest of your day. And Hillary, Dan, Mitch, thank you once again.
Thank you.